Hello everyone, this is my 1975 BMW R75/6. If you've been following along in this series of videos, you'll know that my two-wheel buddy and me have been together since 1975 and travelled just over 140,000 miles together. Well, due to a whole load of weak excuses, the bike has been off the road for over a year. Now, after a bit of work, the bike is almost ready for its first burnout. Well, perhaps a purr around the neighbourhood would be a better description. This series of 6 videos has documented the service work I carried out on the bike. In the last episode, we refitted the carburetors and the petrol tank, then cranked the engine. Well, it started, but with the carburetors on their basic settings, the engine didn't run very well. In this video, the last episode of the series, I'll show you how to tune and balance the Bing carburetors. It's not a black art, it's not too difficult, it just needs a little practice. There's lots to do, so we best get on with it. The two carburetors are a mirror image of each other, and all the basic settings are the same for both. Before we start to tune the carburetors, let's familiarise ourselves with the names and positions of the parts that we will be adjusting. This image was taken before the carburetor was fitted to the engine. We're looking up at the side of the right hand carburetor that normally faces the engine. Here is the end of the choke cable, here is the throttle cable and the butterfly control lever. This is the throttle stop control screw. In this image we're looking up at the bottom face of the right hand carburetor. This is the throttle stop control screw with metal ready, and this is the mixture control screw. We've now moved to the choke lever on the left hand side of the engine. The lever is in its off position, no choke on the engine. And this is the choke lever in its full on position. The engine is on full choke. Before tuning the carburetor, it's good practice to clean and set the points and make sure the ignition timing is spot on as well. These two tasks have already been described in detail in a previous episode of this Airhead service video series. As far as this video is concerned, these two jobs have been completed. The throttle stop control screw and the idle air control screw, they need to be set to their basic settings before the carburetors are tuned. We'll set the throttle stop control screw first. The image you're looking at shows the side of the carburetor that normally faces the engine. I'm using this image as it will be clearer to you what needs to be done. You will have to perform these tasks on a carburetor with this side facing the engine. Use the throttle cable adjuster, just here, to maintain slack between the cable and the butterfly control lever. You should be able to lift the cable just here, about 1 millimetre, without the butterfly control lever moving at all. We are now looking up at the throttle cable and the butterfly stop screw. Loosen the butterfly stop screw until a gap occurs just here. Make sure the throttle cable is slack. If it is, then the carburetor butterfly will be closed. We need to place the butterfly in its basic position. Screw the butterfly adjusting screw in until it just touches the butterfly lever here. Continue to screw the adjuster in one complete turn. The butterfly is now in its basic setting. We're now looking up at the base of the right hand carburetor. You can see just here the throttle stop control screw we were just adjusting. Now this screw is the idle air control screw. Turn it slowly clockwise until it bottoms out and then unscrew it one complete turn anti-clockwise. This is now the basic setting for the idle air control screw. The last thing we need to check and possibly adjust is the choke position. Push the choke operating lever on the left hand side of the engine to the off position. The choke control lever should have been pushed down against the fully open boss. Back to the left hand side of the bike, push the choke operating lever down to the fully closed position just here. The choke control lever should have been pulled up against the fully closed boss. Right, exciting times now. The choke is on full. Petrol is on. Ignition on. And we're in neutral. Right. So now we've got to wait for it to, we'll start the engine again, wait for it to warm up, and then what we can do is start tuning the carburetors. Right, both of the carburetors are now set with their basic settings. I've actually run the engine, so it's a little bit warm, so it should start okay, and I'm not going to use the choke. Now what I am going to do is start the engine and then make sure that the choke is off, and then check that the choke is off right at the carburetor, and that's with the choke control lever. So first of all, let's start the engine. I've got the petrol on this side, and the choke is right off. Right, so I just check again that the choke is right off here. Now if you look down the back of the carburetor, down here, follow the choke cable down, you can see where the choke control lever is, and that needs to be touching the stop right at the bottom. So I can go down with my finger and I can feel that that's against the stop, and we check the other side as well, and that's there as well. So I know that both of the chokes are fully open. Now the tick over at the moment is still a bit slow, so I think what I may do is just open up the throttle stop screw just a little, so it can tick over on its own without me having to hang on to the throttle. Yeah, as soon as I close the throttle, the engine goes off. Take the ignition off. I've been adjusting the throttle stop screw, and I've had to screw that screw in another whole turn to get the engine to run on its own without me having to touch the throttle here. Now it's important that the engine runs on its own, because you don't want the throttle cable affecting the butterfly at all. That butterfly's got to sit on top of the throttle screw. So now it ticks over about 1000 RPM, which is too fast, and I'm sure as it warms up it's going to get faster and faster, but that's no problem because we can bring the RPM back down again using the same screws. In fact, that's what we do when we tune the carburetor, as you'll see a little later on. Right, let's just start the engine again, and you can hear the new tick over. There we go. Now the throttle is closed, and you really don't want it to affect the butterfly, so come down to the top of the carburetor where the throttle cable touches it and just lift the throttle cable to make sure that there's clearance there, and do the same on this side as well, and there's clearance there. I can still put my hand on the engine so it's not too warm. Yeah, so we can use this now as our basic setting and start the tuning. A note here about engine temperature. As you start to tune the carburetors, you walk from one side of the engine to the other, time will pass and the engine will get hotter and hotter. Now how do you know when to stop and let the engine cool down? It's a question that everyone asks. My manual said don't run the engine for more than 10 minutes as you tune, and I tend to stick to that. I normally look at the clock as I start the engine. I'll tune for about 10 minutes, then turn the engine off for 10 minutes to let it cool down. Of course it does depend on air temperature. If you're tuning your carbs in a heat wave, the engine will heat up a lot quicker than if you're in 6 inches of snow. If in doubt, stick to the 10-minute rule. It's always worked for me. Now the carburetors are on their basic setting, and we've just adjusted the tick over screw to get the engine running on its own so it's not being pulled up by the throttle cable. The next thing to check and adjust is the idle air control screw. Now that's on its basic setting as well at the moment, so we're not sure if that's correct or not. It's going to be somewhere close, but it's not going to be perfect. So what I'm going to do is use a screwdriver, put that into the idle air control screw, this is with the engine running, and then turn the screw clockwise and then listen to the engine. I'll be turning it clockwise until the engine starts to falter, and then I'll be coming back and then go anti-clockwise. It'll go through the patch where we've just been, and then it'll start to falter again as you carry on going anti-clockwise. Once that happens, you know that the setting is somewhere between those two faltering places. So you then come back clockwise until the engine sounds the best. You keep going backwards and forwards, and then once that sounds okay, we then go on to the other carburetor and do exactly the same there. So let's go ahead and give that a go. So we have the engine ticking over. It's a bit fast at the moment, but that will have to do. I'm now putting the screwdriver into the idle air control screw. I'm going to turn it clockwise. Now we need to listen to the engine noise. Clockwise. That's about half a turn. And now it's started to falter. So I'm coming back. That's half. And now the engine's starting to falter again. So I go back clockwise, and I go backwards and forwards until I find the point where the engine sounds sweetest. Which is about there. Right, and now I'm going to do the same on the other side. We're now on the left hand side of the bike, the engine's running. I'm going to turn the idle air control screw clockwise once I find the slot. There it is. So I'm going clockwise, that's half a turn, we're speeding up. And now we started to falter, so we come back, speeds up. And we're starting to falter again. So we go back and we find the point at which the engine's going fastest. Which is just there. So that's the first pass of the idle air control screw. The next thing we have to do is now drop the tick over a bit, because it's starting fast at the moment. Should be about 600 to 800, and I think we must be about 1,000 now. I've just readjusted the tick over on the engine. Now I did that by using the throttle stop screw. I moved the one on the left hand side. Now remember, if you want to decrease the RPM, you unscrew it. If you want to increase the RPM, you screw it in. So we wanted to decrease it, so I'm going to unscrew it a little. So what I did was unscrew the one on this side, about 1/8 of a turn, went on the other side, did that the same, then come back a little bit more, then on the other side a little bit more, and then I adjusted the idle air control mixture screws again. On one side, get the best tick over, and then go on the other side, adjust it again to the best tick over. So the engine is now ticking over quite nicely, around about 800 RPM. Now we have to tune the carburetors against each other. So each side of the engine is working as hard as the other side. Now the way we do that is start the engine and then choose a cylinder. I'm going to choose this one because it's the closest one. With your screwdriver, unscrew the butterfly stop screw just a bit, about 1/8 of a turn. Then go into the idle air control screw, adjust that for the best tick over. Once you get that, you then go around the other side of the bike, and on the other cylinder you pull the HT cap off and then count the beats this side of the engine goes through. So you hear it go doof, 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 doof. If it's any more than 5, put the HT cap straight back on. Then you do exactly the same procedure, but on the other cylinder. So on that one you would unscrew the butterfly stop screw, about 1/8 of a turn, tune the air screw with a screwdriver for the best tick over, and then you come around here and pull this HT cap off, and then count the exhaust strokes, doof, doof, doof. And you keep doing that. You go from one side to the other, to the other, to the other, and slowly the engine RPM will come down, and the two cylinders will get tuned to each other, and you keep going until the number of doofs you get when you pull the HT cap off is 3 to 4. So pull the HT cap off the other side, you hear this side go doof, 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 and then the engine will stall. Then you put the HT cap back on, start the engine, let the engine settle, and then do the same with the other cylinder. If you get 3 doofs, then the engine is in tune. I've just adjusted the left-hand cylinder. The butterfly stop screw I've undone just a tab, about 1/8 of a turn. I then went into the mixture control screw, adjusted that for the best tick over, and now I'm on the right hand side of the bike and I'm going to be pulling off the HT lead just here. Now when you pull the HT lead off, try not to touch the bike because you may get a shock. So you pull this off and then you count the strokes, the doof 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 strokes. If there's more than 5, we stick the HT cap straight on, because what we're aiming for is 3. So let's see how it goes. And we have more than 5, so that's gone back on. What I'm going to do now is adjust this cylinder. So I'm going to reduce the butterfly screw, unscrew that just a tad, then onto the mixture, and then I'm going to go on the other side of the bike and pull the HT cap off. And we just keep going backwards and forwards and slowly bring the tick over down, and we just keep going. So when we pull the HT cap off, we get 3 or 4 doofs before the engine cuts out. If it does that on both sides, we're in tune. I carry on with the adjustment, going from one side of the bike to the other. I'm turning the screws a very small amount, about the thickness of the slot in their heads each time. The number of doofs slowly reduce, as does the tick over speed of the engine as well. And then at last, the tick over is now quite slow, so I'm going to pull this HT cap off first. We've got to count the doofs, remember. And that was 2, almost 3. And now the left-hand left-hand cylinder, and that was 2 as well. So the 2 cylinders are fairly well on tune to each other now. We now have the 2 cylinders in tune with each other, but the tick over of the engine is now a little bit lower than it should be. And what we need to do is lift that tick over to the correct amount. Now that's between 600 RPM and 800 RPM. Now the way that we lift the tick over is the same. We use the same screw as we did when we brought it down. That's the butterfly stop screw. Now we're going to screw that screw in on this side, but just a little, even less than what we were doing on the way down, because this the tick over increases quite quickly. So we just crack that screw on this side, go on to the other side and turn the screw on that side, then come back to this side. If it's still too low, screw the screw in a little bit more and then go backwards and forwards until you get the correct RPM level. Now at that point we're going to listen to the tick over, but on each of the cylinders is separately, and the way we do that is by pulling the HT cap off again. So if we pull the HT cap off of that side, this is a cylinder that's doing the work, and if we pull this one off, it's that cylinder that's doing the work. Right, so the engine is running. We now pull this HT cap off and we listen to the tick over. Hopefully it will just carry on ticking over. Note the speed. If it just ticks over for a while and then stops, try and assess the number of doofs there were. Put that HT lead back on, go to the other cylinder, start the engine if you need to start the engine, or if it's running, that's fine. Pull the HT cap off and assess the number of doofs or the speed that it's going. And what we're trying to do is get each side of the engine to work as hard as the other side. So if when you pull the HT leads off, both sides are the same, and that's what you're aiming for, then that's great, and this part of the tuning is complete. If one side is working harder than the other, then you'll see that by one will be faster than the other. So if when you pull the other side HT lead off, the tick over is faster, then that means this cylinder is working harder than that one. So just reduce that by unscrewing the butterfly stop screw just a tab, and then do the test again, pulling the HT leads off. And you keep doing that until everything is in tune. Okay, now we're happy with the tick over. The last thing we need to look at is the throttle cable adjustment. Now, On this bike there's two cables and they need to open up the carburetors at exactly the same time, so the left and the right hand cylinders start accelerating the bike away at the same amount of power. Now the easiest way I've found for doing this is on the other side of the engine. I've set the gap between the outside of the cable and the adjuster to 1mm and then done up the lock nut. So that is set. Now the 1mm, the manual says 0.5 millimeter to 1mm of slack. The reason I go to 1mm is on the first run after you've tuned the carburetors and the engine comes right up to temperature, because you're not really sure if the engine's right up to temperature as you're doing the adjustments, and I normally find that it hasn't, and the tick over will rise. Now on the run you can drop the tick over, but if you've only got a little bit of slack in the outside of the cable, then you might not have enough slack to drop the butterflies down. So that's why I put the 1mm of slack on the other side. So 1mm slack on the other side. I've done up the adjuster. I now start the engine and then lift the throttle slightly, and what you're listening for is the right and the left hand cylinders to accelerate at the same amount. They've got to come in and accelerate nicely. If one cable comes in first, then one cylinder will try to work harder than the other, and you get again you get the doof 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 noise, and you don't want to hear doof 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 or any chugging. It's got to accelerate nice and smoothly. Now what you can do is, if you've got a mismatch, you can just lift the outside of the cable and then use the throttle. If it gets worse and you've been lifting, then you know that this adjuster has got to go down. Or what you can do is leave that side set, undo the lock nut here of the adjuster, unscrew the adjuster, say half a turn, try the throttle, remember what it sounds like, come back, adjust it another half a turn, do the throttle. Is the mismatch worse? If it's worse, then you know you're going the wrong way, so you can start screwing in. If it's getting better, then carry on the same way. Half a turn, rev it, and then when you get to the right adjustment and the engine is accelerating away nicely, you do your lock nut up. And then you go out for your first test drive. Guess what? On that test ride, as the engine became nice and hot, the tick over became faster. It wasn't too bad, so I waited till I arrived back home before adjusting the butterfly stop screws. After a couple more runs, I dropped the throttle cable clearance down to about 0.5 millimeter. That's around about 1/64 of an inch. Well, I've been riding around for about 12 miles now, and the bike seems to be going okay. I've stopped it, and I purposely haven't turned the fuel off because I'm interested to see if the floats are going to seat. See, the fuel is still on up here, and we've got no flooding down here, which is good. Let's just check the other side. The carbs feel fairly well balanced, which is good, and this carb is dry as well. So that's really good news. We haven't got any flooding carbs at all. The bike is back on the road, the engine is running nicely, and it's summer! Woo! What more could a person want? And that's it! We've now arrived at the end of the 6th video, and also the end of this video series. It's documented the basic service work I needed to carry out to get my old airhead boxer back on the road. I hope I've shown how easy these old BMWs are to service, and it's given you the confidence to give it a go yourself. But just before we go, if you've enjoyed this video, can you do us a big favour? Click the thumbs up icon and subscribe if you haven't done already. These clicks will only take you a second, they will help the channel no end, and it won't cost you a copper penny. Could you do something like this? Of course you can. And with that, this video is at an end. Take care everybody, and I'll see you next time. Could you do something like this? Of course you can.